Family law matters can be both confusing and frightening. And with all these different questions, it's very difficult to find the source for answers. Well, here's one for you. You can ask Andrew. Ask Andrew is the only online-based call-in show where Andrew Feldstein of the Feldstein Family Law Group makes himself available to answer all of your family law questions. So tune in and ask Andrew.
On this January 19, 2017. Today, we're very fortunate to have a social worker with tremendous experience with us. I wanted to welcome Triena McGuirk to the show.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. As I start, I want to let some of the viewers know your experience because I think it brings a unique aspect to family law. Triena does work as a social worker for the Office of the Children's Lawyer, and I'm going to ask her in a few minutes to explain what that role is, but if you're involved in any litigation regarding children and you've had them involved, you realize how important they are to your cases. She's an MSW, which is a Master's in Social Work. She does some work as a parenting coordinator, and she tells me she's recently trained to do collaborative family law files as the parenting neutral party to assist. Why don't we start with what's your role as with respect to the Office of the Children's Lawyer?
So for the Office of the Children's Lawyer, it's twofold. One is I become involved in custody access disputes where judges essentially need a third-party perspective as to what's happening between parents and what's the nature of the conflict between them that's impeding them from settling. So in that role, I will become involved. I'll meet with both parents, observe them with their children or child, contact a variety of collaterals that are involved with the family, which could be from police, children's aid, physicians, children's schools, other clinicians that are servicing the family. And through the course of that investigative process, I then come to formulate which is a piece of a parenting plan, was how the parents can co-parent, communicate, have rules and expectations with consistency between households for the children, but also make recommendations to the judge about where the custody should lie and also what the access arrangement for the children should look like. In a second role with OCL, I do clinical assists for lawyers that are representing children in files. So if it could be custody access or it could be other matters that they need a clinical feedback on. So I'll assist lawyers as well.
Okay, and I know from my experience as a lawyer, when the Office of the Children's Lawyer gets involved and there's a social worker as yourself, the courts give a tremendous amount of respect and deference to what you say. Now, a judge has the ultimate say, but frequently they follow the recommendations that come from the Office of the Children's Lawyer. Would that be your experience as well?
Yes, having gone to trial recently in the last couple of years, I've seen that come to fruition. And they do put a lot of weight into what we say, which makes our investigations incredibly important, that we're efficient and we go through all the evidence that we possibly can. I know for myself, I've often delayed, we have 90 days to do our investigation, and I've often delayed my investigations up to 3-4 months longer to make sure that I have all the evidence that I need. Recently in a trial, the judge did make my recommendations an order. However, he did so 2.5 years after my recommendations were made. So it was an interesting learning curve for me in the sense that the recommendations that we make are a snapshot of where the family is at that day. And so the recommendations I made were well suited for that family, but 2.5 years forward into the picture, into their lives, the same recommendations I don't think I would have made because the child had grown, the family had changed. So it is important that the recommendations are used at the time that my assessments are formulated and provided to the court.
Okay, and I see we have a question from Lucy on Facebook Live, and her question is, what is the best way to explain my divorce to my children? My daughter is 4 and I'm really worried about ruining her happiness. She's such a happy kid.
Okay, it's heartbreaking for all kids of all ages to hear that their parents are separating. I think in my experience, honesty is always the most important thing with children, because when we're not being genuine, they do sense that. However, we need to balance honesty with what is adult content. So it's an age appropriate way for me to tell a 4-year-old is, if you can, for both of you to sit down together and deliver the same message, practice the conversation before you sit down with your child, so you're very clear about what it is that is being said and that the message is consistent. And I would simply say that sometimes mommy and daddies, or mummies and mummies, or daddies and daddies, don't get along anymore. But that doesn't mean that we don't care about each other. It doesn't mean that we don't care about you. But the way our family operates is going to look a little bit differently. And so we'll have 2 houses instead of 1. And sometimes they have questions such as, can they bring their things with them? Am I going to have a bedroom at the other house? These are things that children that age tend to bring up. A key piece for children when you're in the early stages and ongoing through separation, divorce, is that they are allowed to carry belongings with them, such as they might have a blanket or a teddy bear or something that's familiar to them. They should be permitted to move between residences with that. And just keep it simple, and keep it positive in the sense that you can. Always try to honor the other parent. Children that age are seeking information about fault sometimes, and it's really important not to bring the adult components of the conflict into the conversations with children.
I'd have to add to that, and I'm doing this more from my own personal experience, that when my ex and I told my kids when they were 9 and 7, I would say that was probably one of the hardest days of my life, seeing my children's reaction. My daughter actually said, "Are you joking?" Because she didn't believe it. She said, "I thought you were going to tell us that we were going to have another baby."
Oh.
So you have to realize that for children, it's not just the message you're giving them. You can try to plan and you can try and anticipate, but it doesn't mean you're going to have any idea of where they're coming from.
No.
And my own personal experience is I have a lot of sympathy for you, Lucy, because it's a really hard thing to do it. I did it with my ex at the time, and we were on pretty good terms, and it was still a very hard thing. So practice it, like you were just told, is a good idea. Do the best that you can, but be prepared. It's going to be a really hard day, and it's going to be hard on you. That's the reality.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add to that is children show signs of stress in different ways. So your daughter in that instance was very vocal about it. And other children tend to internalize things. So I would suggest reading about signs and symptoms of stress in children as well to understand, because sometimes children at the age of 4, they might not always articulate their thoughts and their concerns related to the separation or divorce. However, it may manifest itself in other forms, such as behavior. You'll often see a regression in behaviors of children with the reemergence of maybe thumb sucking or bedwetting, clinginess to a parent or another caregiver in their lives. Those are all signs and symptoms sometimes of signs of stress in children. So just to be aware that children primarily communicate through behavior, not necessarily through words, particularly at the age of 4 years old.
And that's a really good point, because there's a lot of things you should be watching for to see how your child does after this takes place. We have another question in on Facebook Live, and this one is, can one spouse manage a matrimonial home without the signature, mortgage, I guess my eyes aren't as good as I thought, mortgage a matrimonial home without the signature of the other spouse? I owned the home prior to our marriage, and our divorce is now pending, and there are outstanding debts related to the home. It's a good question, but it's a really simple answer. If you want to put a mortgage on the matrimonial home, you need the consent of your spouse. You can't do it without the consent of your spouse. Now, if you have significant debts and they're refusing to cooperate, then one option, if you are in the court process, would be to bring a motion to dispense with their signature, because if it's a mortgage, the interest is going to be far lower than credit cards are going to charge. That would make sense. It's a question of balancing what's the cost of the motion going to cost versus the benefit of the lower interest payments, and how long you think this case is going to be outstanding for. I hope that's helpful. And I did want to go over one more question that came in before the show. And I think this is an interesting one because it goes to the frustration that people sometimes have with new partners when they repartner. And this is, I was married, now separated. I signed a separation agreement and the divorce should be finalized shortly. My ex-wife pays me $397 a month in child support. We both have great jobs in the government. She makes more than me. I received a letter from her lawyer asking for a child support review, as she is saying there's a material change in my situation because my girlfriend is living with me. My research shows that the girlfriend living with me should not affect my child support. We have a 50-50 shared custody. They have requested all the personal tax and salary information on my girlfriend. We obviously don't want to send this information, as I believe it's an attempt for my ex-wife to gain information on my girlfriend. And I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from when I see this kind of question. And you need to understand the overall basis of it. We start with, it sounds like you have equal time and you're doing set off child support and your ex resents the fact they're paying you child support. Section 9 of the Federal Child Support Guidelines is the governing statute. And you start with the set off, but you have to look at the conditions, needs, means, and other circumstances of the parties. So is it a material change when somebody new moves into the home? It is. Child support would be reviewed annually in any event. And what they want to try and suggest is that your new partner is going to make enough money that she shouldn't have to pay child support. And therefore, they want to get the financial disclosure of her income. Now, in order to do that, they're asking you to provide it. You can say no if you want to say no, and they may actually then bring a motion against your current partner for the disclosure of her income. She may have children of her own. She may have support of her own to pay. She may be collecting support. There's a whole plethora of possibilities of what's going on. And is it something that's going to realistically happen? I think you have to be practical. We're talking $400 a month. Is someone really going to take you to court over $397 a month? Most of the time they're not. And what they're trying to do here is they want you to say, I'm going to give up the $397 a month so you can't see my current partner's income information, because they know if you have to produce that, that's going to give you a lot of grief. And if you went to court, that's really going to be your sales pitch. But it's pretty rare when you don't have to disclose your current partner's income. Very rare. Your current partner doesn't have to pay child support, but it can impact the relationship between the two of you. I hope that helps that particular person. I see there's another question on Facebook Live from Tara. My spouse and I are getting divorced. His business started while we were together and now is very profitable. He said that if I get my own lawyer and dig into his business, he'll make it worse for me. He said I won't get half of what I am worth or able to get. He wants me to work with one lawyer. Is this a bluff or a truth? Well, I will tell you this. If there is one lawyer who is going to draft an agreement and claim he's acting for both of you, I'm sure he's going to get to know our insurance provider quite well, because that's a recipe for negligence. It's very, very simple. You don't act for both parties. Is your spouse being truthful when he's saying you may do worse if you dig? He may be right, he may be wrong. A lawyer can't predict, because when you dig and you look, there's a question of whether you're going to find something. From his responses, I would assume he has something to hide, and it's a question of hiding it. And when you sit down with a lawyer, which is something you should do, and a lawyer of your own, you can have a discussion about what was your lifestyle like? What was your budget? How big is your house? What is your mortgage? How much did he disclose on credit applications as his income? There's a whole bunch of different ways that one tries to see what somebody's real income is. And when someone is living in, say, a home that they bought 3 years ago for $2 million and they have an $800,000 mortgage, and they claim that they make $25,000 a year and you make 20, there's a disconnect there that can't be reality, because a combined income of $45,000 can't support that lifestyle. So there's going to be lots of questions. The real question will be, what are his answers? And where does that take you in terms of settlement? And when someone makes an offer, you have to look at it and say, what does this offer really mean? What's the income that this person is really saying they're admitting to? And do I think I can do better with a lawyer? And if you ask your lawyer that question, as a lawyer, I'm not going to tell you the answer because I don't know the answer. I may do better, I may do worse. The only certainty is I will charge you for my time. And that means that there's a significant cost going out if you want to dig. Doesn't mean you should be scared to, but it means you need to understand the reality and that there's a risk. And the risk is the cost, and the risk is you may do worse. Understand that, and you have to balance that, and you need to make a decision. It's an educated decision. Some clients say to dig, some clients say not to. And that at the end of the day is really the client's choice to make, because it's their path, it's their life, it's their pocketbook, and they have to choose if they want to pay with respect to those issues. So I think it's really important for people to understand that. One of the things I wanted to circle back around and maybe bring up is we had this discussion before about the shared parenting schedule. And I know some people are coming to my office and they say to me, it's just going to be equal time no matter what. From your perspective, do you see that as an assumption or a starting place that more and more people are seeing, or saying, I should say?
Yeah, I do see that as a starting point for a lot of people, which is, I see it as progressive in some instances, is because it's showing the value that both parents take in spending time with their children equally. How often you probably come across this as well, where some people say they're really not interested in spending more time with the children. They're doing it as a means to bypass any kind of child support, because there's often an argument for 50-50 that they're trying to move away from child support. The only thing that I am cautious about with moving directly to a 50-50 is, does it meet the needs of the children at that time? Because sometimes 50-50 meets the needs of the children and sometimes it doesn't. And developmentally, where the child is at is a huge factor in if they can move through that type of access schedule without seeing one parent. So an example being, if we're looking at a toddler here that's 2 years old and has been in the primary care of one of the parents for the majority of their lives, to move from that schedule to an automatic 50-50 shared parenting schedule may not be in the best interest of that child, just because what their care has looked like leading up to the point of separation will look very different than what it is moving after separation. So sometimes, not to deter a movement toward 50-50 parenting, but it should be done in a planned way, meeting the needs of the child as they go along. Some children can step into it really easily, other children can't. So for me, I find it's really contingent on the family dynamic and also the child's needs.
Okay. I see we have a question from Twitter, which is, what's the best way to communicate with a spouse that doesn't want to talk during a divorce? The person's spouse is devastated by divorce and can hardly stand to talk.
Okay, which is fair. So the best analogy I can give people in moving through separation and divorce, and you know this yourself, Andrew, as do I through our personal experiences with it, it's really a world unto itself that you can't explain to anyone else unless you've gone through it. So with separation divorce, I often equate it to a death. You're going through the stages of grief. So if the other person's at a point where they're not able to talk, I think we need to start from honoring their position. Because if one person chooses to leave the relationship, they might be way ahead in the process, in the grieving process of separating than their partner. So we need to be respectful of where they're at in that capacity. If they don't want to speak face-to-face or person-to-person, alternative ways where I've seen success in communication between separating parties has been through the use of communication tools such as Google Calendars or the Family Wizard. Our Family Wizard. Now, these are electronic forms of communication. A Family Wizard has a fee. They do have sliding scales. I have reviewed evidence from both sources through the correlation, through my investigations with OCL. So they are admissible in court. The thing I like about both of those avenues is Family Wizard will give you tips to reduce conflict in your communication, so it can edit the nature of your messages. So you want to make sure you're sending messages that are specific to the children, not engaging in conflict, not demoralizing to the other person. So if you find that you're emotively triggered and you're really fired up, either angry or sad or just frustrated with the other person, that's not a time to initiate communication. So I would do so in electronic format when you're in a place of calm, in a respectful and appropriate manner. Google Calendars and Family Wizard also have joint calendar systems where you can put events of events related to the children on those calendars, such as there's parent-teacher night coming up, there's a dance recital or a hockey game or whatever sporting activities or extracurricular interests the children are in. You can put those things on the calendar, so even though you don't have to communicate with each other, you both are putting in things to communicate about the children. So as you move through the motions of using tools such as these that reduce the conflict, I find the pathways to communication tend to open with a little bit of time as people move through the grieving process associated with separation and divorce.
Well, the other interesting thing is, as a lawyer, I love the written communication over the oral communication because some people just can't help themselves. Yes. And they will send all sorts of vicious emails. I mean, I've seen some people, they'll write on a check, blood-sucking money.
Yeah.
They pay their support. And one who would call the spouse as an email name instead of her name called her the Wicked Witch. And you see the email coming up in the court file of, from husband to Wicked Witch.
Yeah.
It doesn't help when that's your client sending it to the Wicked Witch because it's a hard cleanup. So the thing people have to realize is, A, it is a great way to communicate, but B, every communication that you do in writing, you need to assume that a judge is seeing it, whether it's on our Family Wizard, whether it's on email. And the one that I see the biggest mistake is people think text messages.
No, it's all admissible. I've spent days going through these things.
It's not just admissibility. It's people think if it's a text message, it's not going to be there because it's not easy on email. Well, it's really easy to take a screenshot.
Yeah.
And I remember my ex used to send me some really nasty text messages, and I have screenshots of them. She hasn't done it in a couple of years. The best one was the BBM, because BBM would have time-limited messages that disappear. So if someone wanted to send you that nasty message, they could program it to immediately delete as soon as the reader saw it so they couldn't capture it.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, my advice to clients is this. Like I said before, assume a judge reads everything. And if you feel compelled to write an email and you're not sure whether it's too aggressive, because like you said, you should wait and it can't wait, the first thing to do whenever writing an email to your ex is where it says to, leave it blank. You don't put their name in until you're ready to send. Because if you put the name in advance, you might mistakenly hit send and really regret it, especially if it's the kind of email where you're just venting for yourself.
Yes.
It gets out there. And now you're going to have to do some backtracking and say, I'm really sorry. It wasn't meant that way. Who wants to do that? And who wants to empower the ex like that? So really, really careful. Be very mindful and think about it. And to circle back to the question, if the person doesn't want to talk to you, then you can't talk to them. That's reality. And what you then need to do is to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to send the emails. Because if they ignore the emails, I would think you're going to...
tells you that as well.
Well, that tells you something. And it also tells you that if your emails are reasonably constructed, like, can you pick up the kids can you pick up this child after school because the other child has a doctor's appointment and I don't want to drag them with for the doctor's appointment, and they just completely ignore you time after time, your argument's going to be, well, joint custody isn't workable because we can't communicate. And getting along and communicating doesn't mean that we need to talk anymore. But at the very least, even if you don't get along with your former spouse, you should be able to communicate with respect to the important parenting decisions and working out a schedule in a civil way via email, text message, Google, or our Family Wizard, which for some people, I will tell you, it's a great tool. And it's wonderful because the same idea as Google Calendar, when people can't control their calendars, it's nice that there's a unified joint calendar that you can see. I think we may have another question that just came up on Facebook Live, but I can't seem to get my hands on it right now, so I'll move on from there. I think one of the other areas that people need to think about when it comes to family law and they're going through this is, you were talking about grief before, and you have to realize that at some point you are going to move beyond that grief. And there are different things that I see in my practice that trigger significant changes in the post-separation relationship with both parties, which is usually when a new partner enters the picture. And how do you see that impacting cases, whether it's somebody moving in and living with somebody, whether they're getting married, or just simply a new boyfriend or girlfriend that's introduced to the kids?
How do they go about introducing the new partner?
Well, how do you see the impact of it?
So I think I see things twofold. So I think at the initial point of separation and divorce, and leading through all the way to the introduction of a new partner, I think it's imperative that people enter on this course with a vision of the life they want to create for themselves. So they might not know how they're going to get there, but if they have a vision of what it is they want their co-parenting relationship to look like, and they want their individual lives to look like, they will eventually get there if they're mindful of every action they take leading up to that. So I think it's really important that people look at their support networks, who is available around them. Sometimes our closest friends and family aren't necessarily the best people to support us through the course of a separation and divorce, as they often can fuel the emotional conflict associated with it. So be very cognizant of who you confide in and who you bring into your circles. With the introductions of new partners, I always say go slow to go fast. Children are incredibly diligent at seeking out hidden agendas of adults when adults don't think they pick up on things. So meaning, if you're introducing someone as your friend and they're truly a boyfriend or someone you're dating, my money would be on the children will pick up on that. So you always want to be honest with your children. I think it's important to establish a relationship with any person on a one-to-one basis prior to bringing the children into the mix. And I say this because dating is a crazy world, and we might have connections with people in the period of 1 or 2 months, but beyond that, who knows if there's viability in that relationship. So be very cognizant of how much time and how well you know a person before you bring them in to meet your children. And I would suggest introducing new partners in a neutral setting. So don't go to their house, don't have them come into your home. Maybe go and do something in the community and in something that's interactive as well, that the children would enjoy. So it's a less threatening environment to introduce a new partner. Sometimes children get increasingly anxious if a new partner comes immediately to their home, or if they're going to their home. So it's really about baby steps, keeping the communication open with the children, having them engage in conversations that are identifying emotions, such as how did that make you feel, and then having the children articulate how they're feeling, helping them label emotions. And remember that most children will only say angry, sad, or mad. Sometimes nuances such as frustration might come out more in behavior rather than actually being able to label things. So just be cognizant of those things and baby step into the relationships.
Okay, that's really helpful. I know we're almost at the end of the show. I have one more question, which is, when there are adult children involved in a divorce who were severely, and that's 23 to 33, who were severely emotionally, mentally, and verbally abused when they were younger, will this be considered during the divorce after 34 years of marriage? Well, there's not going to be, if the 23-year-old is an adult and out of school, they're not a child. So it's going to be an argument for spousal support, where you might say that there needs to be a compensatory element of spousal support because it impacted your career from dealing with the children and all of their issues that arose as a result of the emotional, verbal, and mental abuse that they received from the other parent. I hope that's a helpful way of understanding that question, because it's not right on point. The other thing I'd want to add to the other topic about introducing a new partner is sometimes, in my experience, it also triggers a change in the way your former spouse may treat you or the children, because sometimes they get very, very angry when they see, if you're the father, a new woman who is at your home and caring for the children, and they really resent that. And the same way some men really resent when they see another man showing up at their child's hockey game or showing up at activities of the children. And that can create a trigger which can increase conflict once again. And that's something that may be very helpful for people to be mindful of in order to reduce conflict. And if you're experiencing issues, it's a good idea to seek out the help of a counselor to try and process it. Because what you have to remember at all times is to love your children more than you feel the anger towards your former spouse. And it's a real important thing to keep in mind, because when you feel that anger bubbling up where you want to strike out or lash out at your former spouse, think about how it's going to impact your children and whether it really is necessary regarding the issues that you're having. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. That's 100%. I was just reflecting on something I say to people I work with. I always ask them to come back to the question of whose needs am I meeting? And that's exactly what you were saying too, Andrew, is just to keep that in check.
And I often say to my clients when they say to me, I have this right, I have that right, I'm the father, I'm the mother, these are my rights. I tell them, you actually have no rights. You have responsibilities to your child.
Yes.
Your child, you made a choice to be a parent to these children. That means you have responsibilities to them. And it's to their benefit to have a good relationship to both of their parents.
Yeah.
That's what will help them emotionally to be properly developed.
Well, that's the thing I see the most is the emotional harm that comes from children is the rejection of the other parent, right? So something as simple as helping your child, buy a Father's Day or Mother's Day card for the other parent. So simple, $1 at Dollarama means the world to the child. Even if you absolutely despise the other person, it's meaningful for your child to show that honoring of the other parent.
And that's really good advice to keep that in mind. I even say it's a good idea, let your kids have a picture of the other parent in your home in their bedroom. It doesn't mean you have to hang a picture of your ex-spouse in your family room, but there's nothing wrong with it.
No.
I remember when I split up with my ex, I made a point of printing off some pictures for my kids that had them with their mother, and that way they could have a picture of her in their room so that they could feel comfortable and know that. I think it's a really good idea for people to do things like that. I think it's very helpful, and it sends a really good message to the children that they shouldn't be worried about what you think about their mother or what their mother thinks about their father. You want to always be mindful and focused on your kids.
Definitely, 100%.
I'm not sure if there are any more Facebook Live questions. Unfortunately, my screen's a little tight for that, but I'm assuming there aren't any more Facebook Live questions. Do you have any other points you'd want to raise that you think would be very helpful as a good takeaway for parents?
I think just if you go to my website, I put a tip sheet on there. I developed it when I was working in schools, speaking at a parent literacy conference. And I developed that in conjunction with a group of parents. And I think that would be helpful for people to reference because it gives some good tips about how to manage your own stress through separation and divorce, and gives you some tips about co-parenting and how to co-parent with success. And it really identifies some of the pitfalls people fall into. And I alluded to this earlier with children going between residences, not being permitted to take their belongings with them. That's something I see often that causes so much harm to children emotionally. And just consistency with rules and expectations, because children are going to, they're actually masterful at being able to pin parents against each other. So if there is some consistency and some communication around the way you're going to co-parent, even if it is very different, but listening to the other parent is meaningful when they come back to your care, then that way you can speak to something they did positively or something that happened that was negative in the other parent's care. All of this communication and co-parenting I think are key things to circle back around.
Well, thank you. That's really insightful. I realize now that we're over time. So I want to thank everyone for watching. I think this was a terrific show, and I look forward to you watching our next show in February. And thank you for coming out. It's really appreciated.
No problem. My pleasure. Thank you.